Hello and welcome to this tutorial. I really enjoyed this one. I hope you are settled and relaxed and you're not in a hurry to do anything. This is a great tutorial. It's just over half an hour long and it's lovely to just relax and practice some of your new techniques or maybe some things you haven't tried before. I would definitely recommend before you do this, if you're a beginner, have a look at the tea to butter tutorial. Make sure you've done that. It's only 8 minutes long and it will give you an idea of what consistency of paint versus water that you need. And then also have a look at the 5 watercolor technique tutorial as well, because I'm going to be using all of those techniques in this feather tutorial. So this is a really good one to follow up and you can put it all into practice. My main aim here was just to relax and go with the flow. So if you have been painting and you tend to overwork or you fiddle too much, this is the one for you because you can just relax and try to just stop yourself from doing all that extra fiddling. It's just easy breezy. So let's get on with it. So I'm going to start by just starting to draw out a really simple feather shape. I'm not focusing on the drawing itself because I want to make all those decisions with the paintbrush rather than be dictated by a strong outline. So just looking for a really simple shape here just to follow. Now I'm using quite a big brush here and I'm just going to wet the area either side of the center of the feather. I'm keeping the center with a thin line of dry paper in between. So here you can see I'm just leaving that central bit white, and that's going to act as the center of the feather for me. And then I'm just wetting and dampening, preparing the paper. You want to avoid having too many puddles. Just take your time to smooth it around. If it is really wet, just give it a moment to dry off a bit if you've wet it too much. And remove any puddles with a piece of tissue if you need to. I'm zooming in nice and close here for you. You can see the nice sheen on the paper, so you can see how wet I'm working here. And then I'm going straight in and dropping the paint at the side of the dry area. So be careful not to go into that. Your paint shouldn't go into it because it won't travel on the dry paper. And then I'm just going down the sort of central stem. What I want to avoid doing with this, it's a very relaxing process. I want it to be quite spontaneous. So I don't want to overthink it. And I don't want to overwork my feather either. So I'm dropping in areas and then I'm trying not to push it around too much. Just let it do its thing. I want to make sure I've got a dark enough application at the side of this central stem here. So I'm just going in over this to make sure that that pops out against the white and then I've got that nice contrast. And then with some sweeping movements, I'm filling in the left side. You want to make sure that your brush is nice and damp, but you don't want to be adding too much water unless that's your intention. Now I'm just dabbing a little bit on the left-hand side because I want some blooms to happen. And then I'm going to pull some of this paint using the pulling technique. So I'm going in with a clean damp brush at these edges, and then I'm just going to pull the paint out into sort of the feathery motion. So just pull the paint, and that's going to be lovely and soft. So you're not adding any more paint, you're pulling what's already there, and that's going to give you a lovely even brush stroke there. But you need to do this before it dries, otherwise it doesn't work. Then I'm just going to drop a little bit more down the centre and just neaten up that central line a little bit. And then adding in a few touches of dark here and there, trying not to disturb the lovely movement that I've got going on. I don't want to disturb the surface too much. I just want to darken that bit there. Now you can already see the lovely granulation effect that's happening with this paint. It's because it's a Daniel Smith paint that it has granulating properties in it, because this is Moon Glow and it's one of their granulation paints. Not all of their paints do this. You need to check if you want this effect that you get a granulating one. And then I'm just using the tip of my brush just to work around the feather. I'm looking at my sort of reference feather, and I'm just putting a few little details here and there. Now I've got quite an empty space at the top left, so I need to make a decision what I want to do with that. I'm dropping in a little bit of damp water into that top right hand corner because I want it to separate. So I'm intentionally adding water into watercolour, which is what you don't normally want to do, but it does give you a lovely bloom effect, and I'm looking to get one purposefully. This is one time when you can have that accidental bloom. So just adding a little stem on it, and then I'm going in again with a smaller brush, and I'm just disturbing the paint just in a few little dots to give it some movement and texture, and I want to see what the paint does. So I'm going to let that feather on the left dry, and then I'm going to do exactly the same as I did before. I'm going to just roughly draw a little outline of a feather shape. Mostly just want to get that central stem in. And I'm looking at this lovely brown feather. I've put this one in the picture for you. It's got a really tufty, fluffy bit at the bottom, which is going to be so much fun to try and paint this. And then I've got this lovely pattern of the browns. So this is going to allow me to practice some sort of layering technique. I'm just taking away the hard edges of my pencil here because I don't want them to show through. And I'm choosing a colour. I'm going to go with Burnt Tiger's Eye because it's a granulating paint and it's quite translucent. It's very, very light, and that's what I want because this is a very light, fluffy feather. And then I'm going to go with a lovely brown ochre for that rich, yellowy brown tone. And then I'm going to use roasted French ochre for that, the darker colour of the feathers. So again, I'm just going to wet the top area, make sure I've got a nice sheen, and I'm going to leave the stem alone. But I'm not leaving a central line through it this time. I'm just wetting that whole feather area. So with my Burnt Tiger's Eye, I'm just going to mix a bit up on my palette. See how translucent it is? You have to work quite a lot at it, and it doesn't become like a really rich amount on your palette. It still has that really translucent quality. And that's why I've picked it, because I don't want anything too overdone. It's sort of like a base undercoat I want, and I want it quite a thin consistency and quite light. So this works really well. And I'm just going to, I'm just sort of feathering and blending the edges here so that I don't get any lines. I just want it really, really soft. And then I'm using a bit of damp water here, and it's just ever so lightly stained with the paint, and I'm using that and then adding a bit more in to create the nice fluffy feathery bit. And I'm trying different ways because I'm sort of making this up as I go along, really. I'm just having a play. And it's working better when I just apply it wet on dry. So I'm just dampening a little bit near the base of the centre of the spine there, and then applying the colour. So I get a softness in the damp area, but then I want the flicky bits at the side to be wet on dry, because then I'm getting more definition with my brush stroke. And because I haven't drawn this out, it's all very It's very spontaneous. It's whichever way my wrist wants to flick. And I'm working quite quickly, so I don't overthink things. And then using sort of little wiggles to add a little bit of character to it. It's not an exact representation of what I'm looking at. It's an inspiration from it. So don't get caught up in making it look exactly the same, unless that's what you really enjoy doing. Try to just be a little bit spontaneous and loose. And don't feel like you've got to push your paint around all the time. Just put a layer down and then leave it and move on and hop to somewhere else so you don't keep fiddling. So I'm looking at what colour is going to work well for that nice sort of rich golden colour in the feather, and I'm going with the Goethite Brown Ochre. Again, it's a Daniel Smith, but you could use raw sienna, or actually no, burnt sienna would be a very similar shade, which is in most palettes, so you've probably got burnt sienna. So you could use raw sienna and burnt sienna here, or you could use a very light wash of sepia instead of the burnt tiger's eye. So I've decided the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to put an undercoat of the brown ochre down, and I want to blend that softly into the layer I've already got on, and I'm kind of disturbing it a little bit and just making sure it all bleeds in together. My paper's nice and damp, so I can get away with this. I'm not going to get any hard lines here. And then I've just allowed that all to dry because I don't want any muddiness happening. And overworking and muddiness happens when you don't let your layers dry. So just completely let the section dry, go and have a cup of tea or get the hairdryer out and give it a good blast. Be aware when you use your hairdryer though, it does make your paper buckle a bit. It's not a huge deal, but it does. I've found my journal book has started to buckle because I've got the hairdryer out a few times. It still folds flat, but it's just something to be aware of if you don't want that. So now I've mixed up my roasted French ochre. What a lovely name that is. And it's a really, really nice colour. If you have like a rose madder or a richer brown, that would be a good alternative as well. Now I'm going to go in and just follow the lines on my feather here. So a rough representation of what I'm seeing. So I've just changed the camera angle a little bit here so you can see I'm holding the feather so that you can see what I'm seeing, and I'm just observing left to right and trying to get that representation onto my feather. And the first feather was a lot more relaxed and just going with the flow and a bit more spontaneous, whereas this one's got a little bit more observation in it, and then obviously the bottom fluffy bit is quite random. Now, because I did that base coat, you can see now that lovely golden brown is coming through the undercoat, and that's giving me this lovely effect for the feather pattern that we see. And I'm making sure that I take it down, just in a lighter tone, I take it down into the fluffy parts of the feathers because that colour does appear there as well. But I'm just focusing on the main body of the feather at the moment. And my main aim is to get that sort of rough shape of the pattern coming through. I'm using a little bit of sepia here while the paint is still damp so that I get a nice sort of soft blending here. I'm just focusing on getting the darker sections in. Now this is going wet on dry because my base layer is dry here. But while the warmer red, the French ochre, is is still damp, I'm also blending it a little bit in with that as well. Now, to get that sort of feathery edge, you don't want to have too much water on your brush. So I've got quite a sort of a rich cream consistency for this sepia layer. Now, I would say I'm layering here rather than glazing, because glazing is a lighter, more translucent mix. And although you can see the base layer, I would say this is a light layering technique that I'm using here. I'm just taking care to make sure my little edges are blended in a little bit. Try not to make it too fussy though. My lamp seems to be glowing for some reason. Maybe I've got a ghosty. Oh, that's strange. I don't know why it's doing that. Okay, so I'm leaving that to dry, and then I'm going to move on to do the left-hand side, the same. So mixing up enough paint again, and then I'm just going to repeat on the other side. So I'm going to leave you here just to observe what I'm doing and paint along. So I hope you enjoyed painting your brown feather there. Now we're going to really go for it. Look at the colour. I could not resist doing this one. I'm a bit of a turquoise girl. I do like greens and turquoises. So what I'm going to do here, because of the size of paper I'm working on, I've just used a piece of card and I've covered my brown feather so that I can put this into view for you and you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to use a little bit of masking tape just to hold my feather down because he's pinging all over the place. And that gives me a chance as well to sort of splay the feathers out a little bit in a style that I want to have a go at painting him. How beautiful is this feather? This is a cockerel feather, in case you're wondering. So I'm just going to, again, just draw out very rough. I don't want to dictate too much. It's just a very rough guide for me as the central line. And just like we did with the first feather, this is going to be just a nice, really relaxing, go with the flow feather. So I'm going to pre-wet all the paper area, just in a rough shape. Just observing where it sort of stops that bit there, where I'm pointing to with my finger, because underneath that it's all really fluffy. So I might do that a little bit differently, but I definitely want the top area all wet. And then I'm just following a little bit where the feather has some sort of split sections. I'm not leaving a white sort of line through the middle of this one because it's quite dark. So I'll be able to do a black line over the top of my layer for this one. That's my plan. So I'm just going to re-wet it because I want this to be really, really nice and damp. And then we can really go for it with the colour. Always make sure you've picked your colours beforehand because your paper will be drying if you're sort of messing around and trying to decide what you're going to do. The colour I'm using here is called Bloodstone. It's a new one that I got, so I want to have a play with it. Look at that. Look how lovely. Again, I don't want to dictate it too much. I really want this to just allow to travel, let the paint go where it wants to go. And I'm just sort of helping it along in a bit of a feather shape. That's the plan. I've just zoomed in so you can see what my paint is doing. I want to make sure it's really nice and rich and dark. And this paint, the Bloodstone, it's not quite as dark as I was hoping. So I might have to drop some other colour in it, but I'm going to see how I go. I'm going to focus on the little shapes at the top and how the feather curves. And I'm pulling the paint out until it reaches the dry area, and then I get a little bit of the feathery edge definition. So I'm doing a bit of a pulling technique here. I'm working with quite a big brush as well. Normally for little dainty edges, I'd use a smaller brush, but I've got a size 6 here. Again, this is just an exercise for myself so that I don't overfiddle with the edges. I thought if I get a bigger brush, I just have to make quick decisions. So my plan is to do the dark area and then I'll do the blue completely separately. But I'm going to drop in the blue so it merges with this darker top bit. It really isn't dark enough, this bit, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to look exactly like the object that you're observing. Just trying to softly blend it and help it along so that that lovely turquoise blends nicely. And then as it's drying, it's sort of a timing. And this is the perfect timing for this because it's not too rich in colour on those edges. And I can just start to pull it out a little bit. Colour is fantastic on this. It's so nice to paint with something so bright and vibrant. And this is when you can get really creative because wherever you want to sort of add those little flicks and you can be as flamboyant as you like with your feather here. Make it as fluffy and tufty and in any direction you want. Now, because I'm filming this, I'm keeping my pad still, but I would recommend turning your paper around if you can, because your hand is always more comfortable sort of flicking away in one particular sort of angle and direction. I'm not so good when I go over to the left side. So by all means, turn your paper around and do it where you feel more comfortable. So here I'm trying more of a different technique here, in that I'm wetting the area around where I've applied the paint, and then I'm going to softly run my brush around the edge of it, and I'm going to pull. I'm just dotting it here and there. I'm purposefully adding a little bit of water into that middle of the feather there, because I want it to separate. I want the paint to move and separate. And you can already see I've got some little white dots coming, because I want that texture. And I'm going to drop this into the damp area. And I'm allowing it to softly bleed and move. It's all experimental. Just really have fun with this. So I'm now getting a smaller brush, and I'm going to pull the paint that I've applied there and use that to create the little fluffy bits around it. Now, if it's not moving much, just add a little bit more water to your brush, but be careful it's not too wet. You just want to be enough to get that paint moving a little bit. Just doing ever so fine sort of wispy bits. You can barely see them. And then I'm going to build on that. Because it's lovely if you've got softer layers, and then you put more layers and more layers. But you can still see all those softer layers in between as well. That's what gives you this lovely texture and movement in your pictures. So now I'm going in with a watery consistency. It's more sort of like a coffee consistency. So it's a little bit bolder to add a few more lines. I'm going to leave you here just to watch what I'm doing, because I'm using the same techniques again and again here now. And this is just my decisions of what I'm feeling as I'm painting. So I advise you to do the same. Just relax and have some fun. And here's a little zoom in on my feathers. You can see that lovely separation of the paint there on the first feather. And I left a nice white edge on the top. I didn't want to mess with it in the end. I had a slight sort of bleeding of the paint and I thought it looked quite pretty. So the second one was a little bit more detailed, but you can see just the looseness of this last feather. I really, really love the turquoise one. And I hope you've enjoyed this. So thank you for painting these 3 feathers with me. I hope you've relaxed and had a nice play. If you're not happy with your feathers, if you feel like you've overworked, just do another batch. It's something really nice and relaxing. I really enjoyed painting feathers. I think because it's a simple subject, it allows you to really just focus on a different technique, maybe try a different technique with each feather, and then slowly start to combine those techniques, such as a bit of wet on wet, wet on dry. You're blending, you're softening, leaving areas, wetting wet and trying not to push it around too much, a little bit of lifting, some purposeful dropping of water in, and it's all going to come together, and you slowly start to build up all these different techniques, and you'll instinctively just start to have fun with it, and you'll make all these little decisions as you go along. You think, oh, I'm going to do this here, and I'm going to do a bit of that there, and before you know it, look at you, you're painting in watercolour. I hope you've really enjoyed it. We're definitely going to be doing some more feathers. I've got lots of colour ones to play with, so I will be doing some more of these. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And remember to email me your pictures so I can share them.